Well, welcome everyone. We have an action-packed agenda today, so let's get started. My colleagues and I are thrilled to be here as the topic of back to the workplace has been the soup du jour for weeks now. And based on the overwhelming response to this webinar, it has clearly been on people's mind. We hope that this information provided here will give some clarity on options and best practices as we begin to bring our workforce back to the office in our post-pandemic world. We know one thing, the workplace will never be the same again. My name is Jennifer Hannigan, and I am the CEO and founder of Alliance Resource Group. We are an executive search and temporary staffing firm specializing in accounting and finance here in Southern California. And I am thrilled to be here today and honored to partner up with these two amazing professionals. I will first introduce Susan Howington, an incredible lady that I have admired in the workplace for a long time. Susan Howington is the CEO of Power Connections Career Services. Her company provides outplacement services, executive coaching, management development programs, as well as HR consulting services. Her company is part of Career Partners International and serves companies of all sizes throughout the US and including large global firms. Susan, take it away.
To be with Jennifer and Carol, and let me tell you a little bit.
Well, I think we may be having a few technical issues, or is it just me?
Oh no, Susan. All right, let's see if she comes on real quick.
I think Susan is frozen in time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish I could do that to myself, but.
So Carol, would you mind introducing yourself here?
Sure, not a problem at all. Hey everyone, I'm Carol Gefis. It's a pleasure to be here today. We are going to be talking about going back to the workplace. Everybody's thinking about that right now. And we want to thank you all for joining us during your lunchtime, right? I mean, this is valuable time. And Jennifer mentioned soup du jour. What are you guys having out there? I think I smell pizza. I don't know, but anyway, I hope you're all enjoying your lunchtime, and thank you again for sharing it with us. So we're going to just jump right in. I'm Carol Gefis. I'm an attorney with Atkinson, Andelson, Loya, Ruud Romo. I practice employment law, and I'm almost embarrassed to say I've been doing this for 31 years now, but I still like it. I'm still having fun, and it's these new issues that come up from time to time that really kind of keep it exciting and fresh. I primarily do litigation, so I'm going to be coming at this from a standpoint of a litigator and telling you guys what I see that could cause problems and, perhaps some liability. So I think we're all here because we want to avoid any potential liability that we can. And so we want to learn about, best practices and bringing our people back to work. So we've got a lot to cover. I'm going to jump right in.
Well, Carol, we actually have two polling questions.
If we do.
Okay.
Please do. I get too excited.
I know, right? So we have our first polling question.
Wait, there's Susan. Hi, Susan.
Okay. Carol, I didn't get to introduce you, or did you all hear the introduction?
I introduced myself.
Okay, good, perfect. Okay, so first polling question is, what is your current policy regarding coming into the office or working from home? If you would take a moment to give us your answers, that would be very helpful. Okay, everybody ready for the second one? Okay. Oh, here we go. Here are the results. So 16% have plans of everyone coming back to work. 24% has the plans of everyone having an option to work from home. And then 59% have a hybrid policy plan going forward. Very interesting. Okay, thank you for that. The next poll, please. Second question, what do you expect your policy to be at the end of summer? Will it change? And again, back to the same answers. Everyone will be back in the office. Everyone will still have the option to work from home or a hybrid policy. So it's pretty much the same in general. 21% say everyone will be back in the office. 8% says everyone will have the option to work from home. And then 72% a hybrid policy. Very good. Thank you, everyone who participated in that. And with that, Carol, would you like to take it away?
Thank you. Yes. Now I can do that. If I can figure out where my screen is here. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So we're going to talk, I've got this presentation here, Avoiding Landmines on the Road Back to Work. And I have to give you guys a little bit of a disclosure because I put a whole bunch of stuff in here and a whole bunch of slides. And we talked about this earlier. It's like, there's no way we're going to get through everything. So what I did is I put all the legal kind of stuff at the end, you know, the requirements, the new laws and stuff. I probably shouldn't even have included it, but you know what, I'm a lawyer. I couldn't help it. I had to put it in there. So I stuck it at the end. So if we don't get through everything, you guys at least have that as a resource. And I have some authorities and some web links that you can use as well if you need those resources. So anyhow, we're going to jump right back in now and talk about the landmines that we're all going to be facing here. And sorry, moving things around. Here we go. Well, I'm going to get my slide move. All right. There we go. We're going to get the bugs out of this thing yet. Okay. So requiring employees to return to the office. And you just saw from the poll, some companies are going to require all the employees to come back. Some are going to have remote work into the extended future. And most companies, it looks like, are going to have a hybrid policy. So the question is, can you require employees to return to work in the office? Like kind of back in the olden days, BC, right before COVID, when most employers had their employees in the office. The simple answer to that question is yes, you are allowed to require your employees to come back. You know, you still have control over your employees, how they work, where they work, and that kind of thing. So that is an option for you. The question, of course, then is going to become, should you really require that based upon the fact that we've now been, almost a year and a half where people have been working remotely. So I would highly encourage everybody to consider being flexible in that regard. We have currently a situation where a lot of employers are actually struggling to get enough employees to cover the work that needs to be done. In no small part because of the unemployment benefits that have been offered over the last year and a half, and people have transitioned out of their old job and into something else. So I think considering flexibility, which most of you seem to be doing based upon the polling results, is a really good option for you. Now, if you do bring all your employees back or some of your employees back, remember we still have COVID-19 protocols in place that have to be followed. I know that there's a lot of mixed messaging out there right now with the CDC, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But for now, we still need to follow all the COVID-19 protocols in the workplace. That means, you've got to require your employees to mask up, have the cleaning protocols in place, hand washing, social distancing, and that applies even if your employees are vaccinated. So that brings up another question about vaccination. But we'll get to that one in just a minute.
So Carol, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
So back on your original slide, can you require some people to come back? Is there liability or blowback issues related to requiring, say, higher level people or lower level people or certain people to come back and not requiring others?
There could be, and it's going to depend upon the position. If you're requiring people to come back because they can only do their work back at the shop or at the office, a receptionist, for example, you can't have a receptionist probably working remotely if part of the job is to greet people as they come in. But you have to be very careful about discriminating between for like, employees that maybe some could work remotely and some could not, because that could bring up a potential discrimination claim. If the employer says, okay, one person has to work in the office and another doesn't necessarily have to, the one that works in the office might say, wait a minute, you're discriminating against me because I'm, pick your poison, right? Because I had a work comp claim because I took leave, whatever the case may be. And I also caution employers, some people are, maybe there are some employees who have had performance issues in the past, so they want them back in the office, but not others. That's a slippery slope also, because especially if there's an employee that maybe had a disciplinary issue, they're thinking maybe they might get terminated eventually. They're going to be looking for every avenue that they can to protect their jobs. And that sometimes includes filing claims or potentially raising claims against the employer. So I would be very cautious about having some come back and some not. You did mention, though, that there perhaps would be a different policy for maybe the management for salaried employees versus staff hourly employees. That would make a little more sense as long as it's uniform within those divisions. Does that answer your question?
No, it does, absolutely.
Okay.
So I have one other follow-up question on that. So there has been obviously a lot of my clients and a lot of companies out there, and especially because we focus on accounting and finance, people have done a great job of working from home for the most part over the last year, 15 months. But we do have clients that are really looking to bring people back. And there are people that have really enjoyed working from home. And so they don't want to come back. And so I know you can require them to, but has there been any, and because your firm is so large and you see this every day, has there been any blowback from requiring an employee to come back that doesn't want to come back? Is there any liability right now associated with that?
Well, that's a tough question because we're just now kind of getting to that point. There is the potential. I mean, I could foresee an employee saying, I don't want to come back because COVID is still out there and I have some underlying health condition maybe that, I'm afraid to come back to the workplace. That's where you might get some sort of liability or some sort of claim where an employee's saying, oh, wait a second, I'm working from home and I'm fine working from home. And you've already proved to me that remote work is viable because I've been doing it. And now you're telling me I have to come back when I have this underlying health condition. So now we're getting into the point where you have to go into what's called the interactive process with this employee to see if you can accommodate their needs if they in fact do have some sort of underlying health condition. You can require that they bring a doctor's note. Those are not necessarily hard to get. If it's a kind of a vague, I'm just afraid without any real teeth to it, you have a better chance of bringing them back. But again, this is all so new that it's tough. You're really going to have to work with your employees to see how you might best accommodate them if that's what it comes to.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And we're going to actually cover that a little bit more in the coming slides. So, okay, here we go. Thank you for the segue, Jennifer. Requiring employees to come to the office. What do you do with the employees who refuse? Now, I'm talking about employees not necessarily who have underlying health conditions or, for some other reason, valid reason, don't want to come back. Like you said, some people just like working from home, right? So what are your options if these people just say, I'm not doing it, I'm not coming back? Well, there are a few. I highly advise not to terminate people who refuse to come back. This is just still too new and too much of a risk. But what you could do is put them on some sort of an unpaid leave, right? Say, look, I'm not firing you. You can take leave, but you're out of vacation, PTO, whatever it is. So you're going to have to go on unpaid leave. Now, if the employee does have vacation time, PTO, something like that, you could offer them to use that first. So at least they're getting some pay. So that's an option. You could furlough them. So again, you're not terminating their employment. They're still going to be on the books. But say, look, we need to have people that are going to work back in the office. And if that's not viable for you, then we're going to have no choice but to put you on a furlough. Another option is, this just isn't going to work. Maybe we need to negotiate some sort of a severance for that employee to number one, limit your liability, because if you offer a severance in exchange for a release, that protects you. And it also is good for the employee because it obviously gives them a little something before they go on their way. And I know that the two of you ladies, Jennifer and Susan, you offer outplacement services. That's another great way to, try to help the employee to transition out of the workplace so that they're not just left without options. Okay. All right, now the vaccine dilemma. This is a hot topic lately, right? Because vaccines have been in the news, and some people are all for it, others not so much, right? So we're having a little bit of a debate as far as the vaccines go. You can require your employees to get vaccinated in order to return to the workplace. That is something that it may still be challenged, but as of right now, the consensus is that yes, the employer may require employees to get vaccinated. So what happens then? Because that's going to be an issue, right? First of all, if you do require that, you need to make sure that you're paying them for whatever time that they take to get vaccinated. If there's any kind of cost that's going to affect them, you need to reimburse them for that cost as well, so that they're not out of pocket either in terms of pay or expense to get the vaccine. I encourage employers to allow their employees to do this on working time. So perhaps give them, okay, you can have an afternoon or 4 hours or whatever the allotment may be to go and get your vaccine, so that they're not, it's not inconvenient for them and so that they're not losing out. In the case of the employee who doesn't want to be vaccinated, that's a little bit more tricky, right? And that's what I talked about a little bit earlier. If it's just a matter of I don't want to and they can't articulate a reason, now we're going back to the slide before about what do you do with employees who won't come back to the workplace. But if they have some sort of reason that they don't want to be vaccinated, so they say, it's against my religious beliefs, or if there's some sort of medical issue that they are concerned about the vaccination process, now we have to enter into the interactive process to work with that employee to determine, is there a way we can accommodate them so that they don't have to get a vaccine, right? So is this an employee who could perhaps work from home? Is this an employee who could continue to work remotely? Is there some other, can you provide them with an office perhaps where they're separated from the other employees? Is there something you can do within the workplace itself to accommodate their objection or whatever it is, whatever reason it is that they don't want to be vaccinated? Once again, I really hesitate to fire anybody for anything related to vaccines or hesitancy to return to the workplace, because we haven't seen the claims yet, but you can bet that there are attorneys out there who are already thinking about this. What if an employee comes into them, says, look, my employer wants me to be vaccinated. I can't be vaccinated. I don't want to be vaccinated. I think it's a violation of my rights. You can bet that there's going to be claims that are coming down the road for that. So I highly encourage every employer out there to work very hard and diligently to figure out a way, if they can, to make it work, right? Again, don't fire them. Allow them to use, paid or unpaid leave of absence. There are, of course, exceptions to this. Now, if you're in a workplace where safety is an issue, early on in the pandemic, we heard a lot about meat packing plants in particular, where because of the proximity of the workers and the type of work that they did, COVID spread like wildfire. That type of employer may have a reason to not accommodate employees who even have a religious objection or a disability. If an employer can show that providing an interactive process and accommodating these employees would provide a threat to other employees, they may have a reason and a justifiable reason to not allow that employee that's not vaccinated back into the workplace, and to actually terminate that employee or lay them off or require them to use a leave of absence. So if the employer can show that this would provide an undue hardship to the employer, that may be a reason to not allow an accommodation for these employees. These are narrow exceptions, and if you're going to go down that road, I would highly advise you to contact counsel to talk that through before you just say, oh, it's a hardship for us, it's going to cost us money, or it'll make the other employees upset. That's not considered a hardship. So you have to be very, very careful about that kind of an issue if you're going to go down that road.
Carol,
Yes, ma'am.
we have several questions, and I'm going to kind of group them together a little bit so that we can get through as many as we can here.
Sure.
There's a question, is there a difference in state laws related to requiring employees to get vaccinated?
That I cannot answer because
Okay.
I'm only licensed to practice in California.
Okay.
So I can only answer as to California. And I just don't know because I haven't looked into that. So I apologize,
Okay.
whoever that asked that question.
So in relation to an employer requiring their employees to get vaccinated, can you make the employee show their vaccine card to verify it?
Yes, you can. If you're requiring it, you may, yes.
Okay, and then can you set up a parameter saying you must be vaccinated by such and such time?
Sure. If you are going to require a vaccine, then yes, you're allowed to provide the time frame in which they have to get it.
Okay, third question is, and there's several questions similar to this about who should come in, who should be required to be in the office and who shouldn't. Are there any guidelines to that? Maybe articles written, any words of wisdom about what you're finding or what other companies are settling on in terms of who needs to be there and who doesn't have to?
Well, it's really going to come down to the essential functions of the job that the employee is performing. So if it's a type of work where the employee has to be present at the facility, if they're making widgets, if it's a manufacturing plant, a meat packing plant, you can't do that remotely, right? So those employees clearly you can require that. Others, you're going to have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. I know Jennifer works with, financial folks and CPAs and such. That's probably a type of job you can perform remotely. So really, it's just going to depend on the position that you're looking at.
Okay, and then last one for me is for employees who refuse to return to work and are furloughed, must benefits, including health insurance, continue to be covered?
That's going to depend on the nature of the furlough, right? If you're looking at a short-term furlough, then you should continue the health benefits. I would, if you can afford it, I would err on the side of caution here, because if you cut off an employee's benefits, you're also then going to have to pay them their final paycheck, and they're going to say, well, you basically just terminated my employment, right? So that was they're going to probably call that a constructive termination versus a furlough. So I would be careful about that. If you can continue the benefits, that would be ideal. If you can't, then you're going to have to take another look at how to handle that.
Thank you.
So Carol, I have one follow-up question on this because
Sure.
all of these questions are so great from Q&A, but what is the, how do you control the message out there? Like within the employees, right? So as employers, we can require looking at the vaccination card, but like I have clients that are particular HR clients that are really concerned because people are coming back to the office and they're talking about whether they've been vaccinated or not. And there's these issues related to privacy and whatnot. So how do you control the message out there within the organization itself? And like, or should we, should we, what do we do?
You can't really control the employees if they want to share their personal experience with the vaccine or talk about getting vaccinated or not. There's not a whole lot you can do about that. And in fact, trying to control the subject matter of the employee's conversation can lead to other issues where employees could say, wait a minute, you're interfering with my right to get together with my fellow employees and talk about my working conditions. Mm-hmm. So you got to be careful about that. As long as management isn't the one that's initiating the conversation, there's really not a whole lot you can do about that. Okay, good. All right, we'll move on. And we're still talking about vaccines here. So I think that somebody asked a question about whether you can ask employees if they've been vaccinated. Yes, you can require that they show the card if you're requiring them to come back to the work. Tread lightly here. Be careful. You can ask them if they've been vaccinated. If they say no, you cannot ask them why not, because that could lead to a discussion about their disability, right, or their religion. So if they say no, just take that at face value and move on, right? So be
Mhm.
careful about that. Some companies are providing incentives for employees to be vaccinated. And this is something that I think you're going to see more of. You have to be a little careful here about incentives. I would not pay cash to an employee, because the ones that maybe aren't getting vaccinated can now say, wait a minute, I'm being discriminated against because you're not paying me the same. But you can say, well, we'll give you time off to get vaccinated, or give them, a small, an extra hour vacation time, or, a small incentive of a water bottle, a free lunch, something like that, as long as it's not too expensive. So that's something that we're seeing. With the labor shortage now that I mentioned earlier, employers are becoming really creative about how to incentivize employees to get vaccinated. And the ones that don't want to, they're trying to figure out how to work with them, because they really need the people in the office, or at least working remotely, to get the job done, right? And again, potential discrimination claims, we talked about that already, but be careful about picking and choosing between who gets to work at home, who gets to come, who must come to the office. And if you're going to require a vaccine, you should require it across the board, unless the employee has one of the, the religious objection, or the underlying health issue that prevents the vaccine. Okay. All right. So I also want to add, there's a lot of guidance out there. The EEOC, the people that we would love to hear from, have not weighed in on this, right? The EEOC has not weighed in on this. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing, they're taking a, wait and see kind of stance, which really puts us all in kind of a little bit of a bind. But anyway, we're doing the best we can. Okay, so who's in charge here? I mean, we heard this last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, that the CDC has said, okay, if you're vaccinated and you're outdoors, you don't have to wear masks. And then they revised that to say, hey, even if you're indoors in small groups, you don't have to wear masks. So everybody's ripping off their masks. Those rules do not apply in the workplace. That applies to, the public in general, retail, restaurants, and so forth. But OSHA is the one that governs the workplace. And so right now, OSHA has not changed their rules. And they're still saying that employees need to wear the face mask, do the social distancing, and so forth. It was Cal OSHA that passed the COVID-19 emergency temporary standards back in November of 2020. And so those are the rules that we need to go by as employers, not the CDC, okay? So as of now, the OSHA rules are set to expire on October 2nd, 2021. We kind of think that's probably going to change, given the COVID rates have declined. OSHA has indicated that they will be coming out with additional and new guidelines. They came out with a few new guidelines last week, but it was nothing substantial, nothing that changes the basic requirements for the workplace. We do expect that to happen fairly soon, though, either later this month or in June. Until then, we have to still follow the rules. So when people come to work and go, wait, I'm vaccinated, I don't have to wear a mask. Yes, they do. And it's up to you as the employer to enforce those rules. Because if you don't, and somebody in the workplace gets sick because they got it from somebody else in the workplace, now you've got a potential problem. For sure, a work comp claim, and perhaps worse, some allegation that you're not following the rules and you're endangering your employees. So just be mindful of that for now. And I'm sure that once the OSHA actually changes their guidelines, it'll be all over the news and we'll hear about it, right? Okay. So some of you have indicated that you're going to allow your employees to continue working remotely, either in full or in part. And I saw that most of you that answered the polling question said that you're going to have a hybrid policy.
Carol,
yes, ma'am.
Before we go into this detail, just to keep up with some of the questions here.
Oh, sure.
And this is apropos, I think, to the next topic you're bringing up, but it's about working from home and the topic of childcare. So one question is, can we require our remote workers to have childcare that isn't the employee themselves?
No, you can't do that, because if you think about it as the employer, you're now injecting yourself into the family the family business, right? If the employee is working at home and if they're meeting their performance standards, then does it really matter? What you can do is you can continue to enforce your performance standards. You don't have to relax those just because somebody is working at home and because they have childcare obligations. So the way I would handle that is to continue to use those performance standards. If the employee who's working from home is having issues, go ahead with your normal coaching or disciplinary process that you normally would, and then go about it that way rather than trying to regulate how they manage their children at home.
Okay, second question, thank you. Here's how it goes. We have an office administrator that is working a hybrid schedule because she has childcare issues. We want her to work in the office because not all of her required duties can be performed from home, and it requires that other staff perform the duties that she should be doing from the office. At what point is this not a COVID-19 related issue and just her preference?
Well, that I cannot answer the last part because I don't know this person, but here's the thing. It looks and sounds like school is probably going to reopen in the fall. Fingers crossed, right? So perhaps a way to look at that would be to let this person know, from now or beginning in September, we're going to require the employees to come back to work. So give them plenty of lead time so that they've got time to consider childcare options if that is an issue. And hopefully the schools will be in a position to reopen so that the children can come back and that issue will disappear. We don't know. I mean, anything can happen between now and then, right? We've seen that over the last year. But that would be my advice, is to at least give it a wait and see and give a long lead time before the employees are going to be required to come back.
Can this employer reduce her hours due to the fact that she won't come in to perform certain duties in the office?
Be careful about that. Reduction in hours can be considered an adverse employment action, which is basically like, something that you're doing to the employee. Unless it's based upon performance issues, I would be very careful about reducing hours. That the employee may argue that you're retaliating against her for, not wanting to put herself or her children at risk. I mean, those are the kind of arguments that people are going to make. So just be really careful about reduction in hours.
Thank you.
Okay. So talking about remote work. So for the employees who are going to be continuing to work either entirely at home or partially at home, just a few reminders. And I know that we've talked about these things before. Okay, maybe we haven't, but you probably have talked to people over the last year about these things. Expense reimbursement. You need to make sure you're reimbursing your employees for cell phone use and internet use if you're requiring them to use those tools at home for work. And that's true even if the employee is not incurring additional cost. So even if their old internet plan, their old cell phone plan already completely covered all the expenses that they're incurring because of work, you still need to reimburse them for a portion of it. Otherwise, the courts have held that the employer is getting a windfall by passing on some of their business expenses to the employee. So just be aware of that if those things are required, you need to reimburse the employee for some of that. Wage and hour issues are something that we've already been seeing and that we probably will continue to see over the next months while COVID is still playing out. So employees are working at home, right? And you're thinking, well, they're not supervised. There's nobody there breathing down their neck telling them when they can take a break. Of course they're taking their breaks. They're probably taking more than their breaks, right? Doesn't matter. Make sure that they are documenting all their meal and rest breaks and that you are monitoring those requirements to make sure that their time cards are adequately filled out, that they are acknowledging their meal breaks, and that if they're somehow skipping it, if it looks like they missed a break, contact them, see if they missed it, and then you're going to have to pay them, of course, if they did. If they did miss their break, you're going to have to pay them for the break plus perhaps a meal period premium. Just be real careful about this. Just because they're working at home, don't assume that they can take their breaks. And what we've seen is that employees are working at home and they're maybe getting calls from their supervisor or something. Because remember, you can't see them, right? You don't know You don't know if they're at lunch. So a supervisor might call them during their lunch break. They feel, oh my God, it's my boss, I got to pick it up. And now their lunch break is interrupted. So those are the kind of issues that we're seeing now as wage and hour issues. People are alleging, I missed my meal period because my boss called me and I had to take a call. So just be mindful of those things so you can keep an eye on that when you're looking at their time cards. Overtime is another issue. People are working, many people are working more than they used to, even though you think, oh, you're working at home. But the lines are blurred now, right, between work and at home and work in the workplace. So people are sometimes working overtime, and even worse, working off the clock. So you get that phone call after hours and, oh, it's no big deal. I'll just do it, type up this letter real quick for my boss, even if I've already checked out. And that's all fine and good until maybe this employee later gets terminated or laid off. And now they say, wait a minute, I didn't get paid for that time that I worked, over, and I wasn't clocked in. It's usually after the employee leaves work, after they're terminated or after they quit, that these things crop up. So you have to keep an eye on it now to make sure that employees aren't working off the clock, and check in with them, right? How's it going? Make sure you're, being paid for all your time. Did you work any extra time last week? Anything like that. So communication is a big issue with people who are working from home.
Carol, in terms of the reimbursement, do you have any guidelines or best practices about how much do you reimburse? Is there a percentage? I mean, what's the common rationale for what an employer would support?
Well, the legal answer is you're supposed to calculate a percentage. The real answer, most employers are reimbursing, $30 to $50 a month for these type of expenses, because to try to figure out between all your employees what the actual percentage of use is, it's just a headache. So that usually covers it. And then what I would do is also let the employees know, if you feel that your expenses are higher than that, please let me know. Give me copies of the bills and then we'll figure it out. So they have that option. They can't come back later and say, oh, they refused to pay me. Make sure they have the option of asking for more.
And question, so this actually came up with one of my clients, and it actually came up twice now in Q&A, which is employer, like you have the option to work from home, but you have the option of working in the office. And so do those employers have to reimburse when they're happy for you to come into the office? It's the employee's choice whether to work from home.
That's a tough one. I would advise you that if you're allowing them to work from home, you should reimburse them for their expenses. If you really don't want to do that, then require them to come back to the office, because it's just too risky. The $50 a month, whatever it is that you're going to be spending, what lawyers charge by the hour? A lot. Trust me, you're going to spend a lot more than that fighting these claims if they come down the line. So I would go ahead and pay that. Otherwise, just make your employees come back to the workplace. Okay. Another issue that I've seen is travel time and mileage. So if employees are working remotely, either full-time or part-time, and they drive directly to a job site to go to work, how do you reimburse them if they're not starting from the office? So it's actually not too complicated. If you have to figure out what the travel time from the office to the work site would have been, and then pay them for anything additional. So if it would have been 10 miles from the office to the work site, and now they have to travel 20, pay them the extra 10. That's pretty straightforward. And that goes for mileage as well. Okay, moving right along. So as far as wage and hour issues, remember, we're still under the guidelines of OSHA. And so we're still having to do safety checks. Some of us are doing temperature checks still, filling out those little questionnaires before people come to work. Make sure that you compensate your employees for any time that's being incurred taking those kind of safety checks, temperature checks, whatever it may be. There's a class action currently pending right now. I think it was against Walmart, if I'm not mistaken, because they require their employees to undergo these safety checks before they come into the workplace. And So the employees filed a class action saying, we're not getting paid for all the time we're standing out there waiting for this person to come back with the thermometer. And then the company said, well, yeah, we're paying you for an extra 15 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it was every day. But a lot of the employees said, do you know how long we have to stand out there in line? Sometimes it was up to like 20 minutes and they weren't getting compensated for that. So just something to think about, if you're requiring any sort of additional safety checks, which you should be still under the current OSHA rules. So just be careful about that. Expense reimbursement, we just talked about. And a lot of these little, a few minutes here, a couple of dollars there don't seem to add up to much. But if you have a lot of employees, remember that they can file what's called a PAGA action, a private attorney's general action, or a class action, which is it's a different animal, but it's the same principle, that one employee can actually represent the entire group. And even if that one employee is no longer in the workplace, they can represent everyone who's worked for you for the last 3 years and who are still working for you for the last 3 years without those people actually participating in the lawsuit. That's where it gets really, really expensive. Pretty soon that $50 expense check turns into, with all the penalties and all the employees that bring this claim forward. I mean, sometimes we're talking hundreds of thousands, even up to the millions of dollars in penalties, plus attorney's fees, and it's just not something you want to do. So it's really all this little picky-uni stuff that everybody hates doing. You really need to pay attention to it because it's the kind of stuff that can come back and bite you and cost you a lot of money in the long run. And remember, the whole purpose for doing all this is to try to limit your liability. So limiting your liability now by making sure you follow all those rules is really going to save your bacon in the long run.
So Carol, just again to kind of lump some of these questions together. So to clarify, do employers do they have to compensate for cell phone internet if working from home only 2 days or 3 days a week, and then the other 2 in the office? So is this a must do for employers?
Yeah, this is a must do. And if they're working from home only part of the time, maybe you can reduce that amount a little bit. So instead of offering them $50, that was just a throw out, maybe give them 25 or 20. But okay. Yes, it's absolutely a must.
Okay. Does an employer need to have a remote working agreement for those working from home to protect the company?
It's not required, but it's a great idea. And I highly recommend that you have a remote work agreement. That way you can spell out all these rules, regulations, the expense reimbursement, the timing, the lunch breaks. You put it all out there on their agreement that they sign, and then they can't say, oh, I didn't know, nobody told me, right? So it's really a good idea to limit liability. Good question.
Okay, last question. If we haven't reimbursed the expenses since COVID began, where or when do we begin? January 2021 or when?
I would actually, and you're not going to like this answer, I would go back to the beginning of COVID when your employees were sent home, figure out what that reimbursement would be and reimburse it now. It's not going to be pleasant because you're going to have to write some checks, make some payments. But remember, it's going to be a heck of a lot cheaper to do that catch up now than it will be if an employee leaves, hires a lawyer, and you get sued for hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. So it's going to be painful, but it's a lot less painful than facing the consequences later.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? Okay. And when I talk about these hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, much of that is in the form of penalties because these class action lawsuits, every time there's a violation, whether it's say, for example, you didn't pay somebody a lunch break. So you didn't pay them for a lunch break. Now you have a penalty for that. And now the paycheck that relates to that particular week is incorrect because you didn't pay them for that lunch break. So now you have a paycheck violation. And the paycheck violation, the first time is $50, the second time is $100, and every time thereafter. So if this happens on a repetitive basis, you can see where this adds up real quick. And then you start multiplying that by the number of employees who are affected. So it's not the one violation that's expensive, it's the add-on of all these penalties over time and the number of employees that may be affected. Okay, now that I've hopefully scared you enough to look back at that and make sure you're accurate with all your expense reimbursements and everything. Finally, I want to just talk a little bit about the harassment, discrimination, and retaliation concerns that we have, or you should have, when you're looking at these policies about back to work, requiring people to come back to work and so forth. One thing that we've seen quite a bit of is retaliation complaints, where employees have complained about a lack of safety protocols at work. That people are getting too relaxed, they're not wearing their masks, and nobody's enforcing it. That's something we're probably going to be seeing more of now that people are everyone's done with this, right? Everybody's over it. Nobody wants to do this face mask thing anymore. But it's important to enforce that kind of thing in the office, because if you don't, and an employee complains about it, and then something happens with that employee, they could claim retaliation. So in this Becerra versus In-N-Out Burger case, that's exactly what happened. The employee had a lot of absenteeism. Along with the absenteeism, he was complaining about a lack of safety protocols within the office. In-N-Out Burger terminated him, and by their reasoning, it was because of his excessive absenteeism. Well, the employee then sued, saying, no, it wasn't because I was absent a lot. It was because I complained about the safety protocols that weren't being enforced. So this is the kind of thing you can have an employee where you're legitimately disciplining and perhaps legitimately terminating an employee. But if they've got something they can grab onto as far as complaints they may have made in the workplace, or they can say you discriminated against me because I didn't want to come back to work because I was afraid. These are the kind of things you have to really be careful about. So even if you have a good reason for the discipline of the employee, they might be able to twist it into something else and call it retaliation or discrimination. So just be aware of that when an employee complains about something or has an issue in the workplace. Again, employees taking time off, employees who may have children, childcare issues need to take time off for that, or they file a workers' compensation claim. COVID claims are covered by work comp. So if any of those things take place, and that employee is disciplined, even if you don't see any kind of correlation at all, be careful, because they can come back and sometimes try to tie that in to make a claim based upon discrimination or retaliation. And then finally, the thing we talked about earlier, where employees are talking maybe amongst themselves about their vaccines or their health conditions or whatever, the Department of Labor calls that concerted activity. So if their employees are talking amongst themselves about something about the workplace conditions, be careful about trying to control that, because by doing so, you could be in violation of the labor board's rules, and they could say you're retaliating against them because they're participating in concerted activity. So just be mindful of that. Okay, I see we're getting near the end, so I know we need to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'm just going to kind of page through some of these real quick so you see what's out there. You're going to get a set of these slides so you can look at it later. But I've covered.
Carol,
yes.
Real quick.
Yeah.
You still need to take temperature checks for fully vaccinated employees?
No, that has actually changed. So
okay.
Those people can be exempted from the temperature checks.
Here's a general question. What about workers' compensation issues for those working from home?
That's going to be a tricky one. I mean, if somebody's working from home and they tell you, my chair is uncomfortable, I need a new chair, or my keyboard is not ergonomic, I need a new keyboard, pay attention, because those are the kind of claims that could lead to work comp. If somebody trips over their cat, that's probably not going to be, which I have done, by the way, that's probably not going to be covered by work comp, but the work comp insurer will sort that out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm just going to clip through these so you see what's here. We have a bunch of new laws. I've got the supplemental paid sick leave. I'm not going to go through the requirements. There's expanded leave for the new Emergency Act. There's COBRA subsidies out there. Work comp coverage, something we just talked about. If somebody gets COVID-19 on the job, they are presumed to have work comp coverage. There's an expanded CFRA, California Family Rights Act. There is a requirement that hospitality workers that have been laid off be rehired before outside hires come in. Current guidance for employees who contract or are exposed to COVID. Again, I'm not going to run through this. You've probably heard all this before, but I want you to know that it's here for your reference. Employees traveling internationally, there's some protocols you need to be aware of, and they're here as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my portion of this so that we can have some more time for Q&A.
So Susan, I know you'll handle some of the Q&A questions in the chat box, but there's a couple of things here. If you can address guests, so guests in your office, so everyone's office has been shut down, and I think for the most part, most of companies are still not allowing vendors on site, guests on site. So, but things are opening up, and what do we do? I know we have the OSHA rules, but what could be a best practice right now as people are coming back into the office and we're trying to get back to normal in terms of policies around guests?
Yeah, right now I would just continue with the compliance as far as the face masks, temperature checks for guests that come into the office. There's not a blanket prohibition on having guests in the office. Just need to make sure that you follow the safety protocols to keep your employees safe. Okay.
One follow-up question on that is related to liability. So there's many people on this webinar that provide services of some sort, or they have people that go onto other companies' sites, right? And not everyone necessarily is being, following all the protocols associated with it. So from a liability perspective, if we have people that are going on site to other companies, where does that end? Where does that liability end? Do we, if they go on to the premises and something should happen, who's responsible for that? And like, who's responsible for the protocol at that point?
Well, if the employee goes to another premises, they're still covered by your workers' compensation. Mm-hmm. So what I would advise is just advise the employee wear their face mask, wash their hands. If the employee goes somewhere and they really feel it's just not safe, tell the employee, don't go in, come back. I'll contact that facility and we'll talk about how to make it acceptable to you. Don't force the employee if they feel like they're in an unsafe environment.
Got it. Perfect.
Okay. We want to just let everybody know that we will be providing the presentation, Carol's presentation today, and a recording of this presentation will be available as well to answer that question. I think we've had several in that regard. And Carol, here's another question, and I know you covered that in earlier, but maybe you want to just summarize. Question is, can an employer separate, quote, separate employees who are unvaxxed and who are returning to work? Doesn't feel right, but just wanted to check. That's the question.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, you may require that your employees be vaccinated to come back to work. If they will not receive a vaccination and you have no remote work available and no other way to accommodate them, yes, you may separate that employee. I do want to caution you, though, that you could be opening yourself up to liability down the road.
Okay. Another question, can an employer address the vaccination topic by doing an anonymous survey to see who has been vaccinated, just to get an idea of how many have been vaccinated and how many are concerned about getting vaccinated?
That's a great question. One I have not encountered before, but as long as it's an anonymous survey, and even the people who look at the results don't know, who answered. In fact, if you use an outside survey source, that would be best, a third party. Yes, I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay, great. All right, we have time for another one or two here. All right, here's the scenario. The company has not been reimbursing for internet or cell phones since March 2020. HR brought the issue of reimbursement to the executive team at the beginning of COVID, and it was not approved as policy. Now an employee resigns and asks for reimbursement for all those expenses owed. How should HR handle it?
You're not going to like this. You need to reimburse the employee, not only the employee that left and is asking for it, you're probably going to need to reimburse all of the employees. This kind of stuff spreads like wildfire. And once the other employees find out that this employee that left is getting reimbursed, there's going to be trouble. So again, you're going to have to bite the bullet and do the reimbursement retroactively to last March.
Okay. Carol, what do companies need to offer in terms of sick leave for non-vaccinated employees who might get COVID?
You still need to comply with the all the sick leave, the paid sick leave requirements. The Emergency Act expired last December, so you're no longer required to provide that additional 80 hours, although you can voluntarily and still get tax credits for that. But as of now, you only need to offer the regular paid sick leave and then the PTO or vacation time, whatever your policies are.
Okay. I think we've covered our questions.
Wow.
And Carol, I want to tell you, you've done a great job moving through this information.
I can talk fast when I need to.
Oh, here's one last one. Will we be covering employers' responsibility and liabilities for providing a safe workplace for employees who are working remotely?
That again kind of falls back to work comp. So if the employee who's working remotely can attribute their injury to something that the employer had an obligation to address. So for example, they need certain equipment, they need a special keyboard, something like that. And they tell you, and you did not respond or did not provide them with what they need, that could bring liability to the employer. But this is going to be a work comp type of liability. So this is something that I would highly advise you just turn over to your work comp carrier and let them sort it out, right? Because they're more well-versed in that and have more experience. So that way you're not the bad guy who's trying to figure it out. And if it's something that's not really related to work, if they happen to trip up their step, at home, it's probably going to be denied. But again, leave that up to the insurance company.
Okay, great. Well, we're at 12:59. Jennifer, do you have any parting words or wrap up?
No, the last question though would be great, Carol. And I know you're not a fortune teller or you don't foresee the future, but what do you think the workforce or the workplace is going to look like in 6 months? And what's OSHA's next move when we start to put together vaccinated and unvaccinated people into the office? What do you think? What's the next move?
You guys aren't paying me enough to answer that question. I don't know. But I think the survey that was taken early on really said a lot. I think many employers are going to go to a hybrid, some sort of flex schedule or a hybrid schedule. I think that's the future of the workforce, and OSHA is going to have to figure out how to best regulate that. So I can't answer that. I wish I could. It'll be interesting to see.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for all your time, and hopefully everybody enjoyed this. And again, as Susan mentioned, we will be sending out a link and the slides and contact information for Carol if there's any additional questions or things you need help with. I think one of the big things was the remote agreement. I think is a fabulous idea kind of moving forward for all of these people that are going to be doing hybrid situations. So please let us know if anybody has additional questions, because we'll put you in contact with Carol.
Thank you all for coming and joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.